Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on how to use the Autotask platform to implement the Kanban method for managing your team's workflow. Kanban is a popular project management approach that focuses on visualizing work and limiting the amount of work in progress to improve efficiency and productivity. In this presentation, we will provide an overview of Kanban and show you how to use Autotask to create and manage Kanban boards for your team. Let's get started. So, who is our presenter? As you can see on the slide, the speaker is industry veteran Dustin Puryear. He has been a successful MSP owner for over 20 years, and his career began as a developer in the .com world, writing networking code for streaming media companies. So he's been around. In fact, he has written several books and has spoken at numerous conferences, including for Microsoft about Linux, NetIQ about high availability, and as Windows and Linux conferences about more than I want to list here. Throughout his career, Dustin has never stopped automating, and he has a deep passion for this industry. His expertise and experience make him a valuable resource for anyone looking to improve their work processes and increase their productivity. In fact, if you buy him lunch, he'll talk to you for hours, passionately about just about any topic. Trust me, I know. I bought him lunch once, and I think we closed out the restaurant. In short, Dustin is a true veteran of the MSP world, and we are lucky to have him sharing his knowledge and insights with us today.
I mentioned I have been a developer since I started my career. I transitioned into owning a cybersecurity IT company. And then after that, I transitioned into a managed service provider. So I've had my hands in a lot of pots, and that's given me an opportunity to really learn a lot about how things work. So what we're going to be talking about today is Autotask and the new Kanban boards. And I'm going to walk through a couple of things. So let's first kick into the overview or the agenda. We're going to cover a range of topics related to using Kanban in Autotask to manage your team's workflow. First, we're going to provide an introduction to Kanban and explain why it has become such a popular project management approach. We'll keep that section short. Next, we'll give you an overview of the Kanban features in Autotask and show you how to enable them in your account. Finally, we're going to walk you through the steps to set up your first Autotask Kanban boards and provide some examples. So what we're not going to do is just show you how to use generic Kanban boards. Instead, we're going to show you how to use them correctly. Because like a lot of things that are dashboard related, people use them incorrectly and they're going to confuse you and your team and mess with your process. But if used correctly, it can really accelerate things for you. So we're going to go through the proper way of how to develop use cases and refine a Kanban board for each use case. So a quick overview, this is going to give you some context and help you really understand how and when you should be using Kanban boards, because they don't fit every situation. So some of you may already know, Kanban has its origins in Japanese manufacturing. And so let's talk a little bit about history. So it started around the 50s, and it was initially developed at Toyota as a way to improve the efficiency of its manufacturing process. Specifically, they would use it on their assembly lines in manufacturing plants. The word Kanban means visual signal or card in Japanese, and it refers to the use of physical cards or boards to visualize the workflow and track the progress of tasks. So the core principles of Kanban are based on the concept of just-in-time production, which aims to minimize waste and reduce inventory. So you guys can relate this as an MSP or IT company owner, because typically the way we get work in, particularly when it comes to the help desk side, is going to be reactive and just in time. So by visualizing that workflow and limiting the amount of work in progress, Kanban helps teams to identify bottlenecks and improve their overall efficiency. So Kanban gradually gained popularity in Japan and other parts of Asia, and eventually made its way to the US in the 80s. Since then, it's become more popular and it's widely adopted project management method, and it's used by a lot of organizations, both small and large. So one of the really cool things about Kanban, it does help you focus on what's important and stay on track. One area of difficulty that people have with help desk systems is a grid view, or we could just call it a spreadsheet view, but it's called a grid view, which is a very detail-oriented listing. Unfortunately, human brains are not good for grid views. It's data intense, and it's hard to parse out. So Kanban is going to help you focus on what's important and stay on track by providing a visual representation of workflow. By using Kanban boards, teams can easily see the progress of each task and identify any potential bottlenecks or issues. This visibility helps teams prioritize their work and ensures that everyone is working on the most important task at any given time. So Kanban is also going to help you reduce delivery time by limiting the amount of work you have in progress. By restricting the number of tasks that can be worked on at the same time, Kanban ensures that team members are not overwhelmed and can focus on completing tasks efficiently. We've all seen this in our MSPs where you try to have maximum bandwidth. Well, it has something called carrying costs. Carrying costs is when you have a bunch of projects or tickets open, those all take overhead. Mental overhead of the tech, of your triage and dispatch, and of your managers. So you end up spending more time managing the work than doing the actual work. So Kanban is going to help you ensure you don't over allocate your resources and you're only working on the things that need to be worked on at any given time. In addition to improving productivity, Kanban can also make work more enjoyable for team members. By providing a clear picture of what needs to be done and how to do it, Kanban can reduce the stress and uncertainty that often comes with working on complex projects. So talking briefly about the visual feedback of Kanban, it's a key component of Kanban method. In fact, it's a vital component of Kanban. It plays a critical role in helping teams work towards a common goal. In Kanban, visual feedback is provided through the use of Kanban boards, which are typically made up of columns and cards that represent the various tasks and stages of the workflow. You will see this in the webinar. And so we're going to go over it now, and then you'll see how it's visualized later. So the visual nature of Kanban boards makes it easy for team members to see progress and understand where that ticket or task is in the overall process in your organization. In addition to providing a clear picture of the current state of the project, Kanban boards also allow team members to provide feedback on the progress of each task. By using comments or other tools, team members can communicate with each other and share updates on their work. So Kanbans can actually accelerate the collaboration within your organization. Overall, the visual feedback provided by Kanban boards is an essential component of this method, and it can help teams to stay focused and work towards a common goal. So where we're going to move now is into how Autotask is actually implementing the Kanban boards. So Autotask Kanban boards are very similar to traditional Kanban boards in that they provide a visual representation of the workflow and they allow team members to track the progress. However, Autotask Kanban boards do differ in a few ways. First, the Kanban boards in Autotask are tightly integrated with the rest of the Autotask platform around the service desk module. This is important to understand because in traditional third-party Kanban boards, you may not have as tight of the integration. And so with the Autotask Kanban implementation, you have more power inside the system you're already using. So one of the items that we're going to address in a later slide is how the use of Kanban boards can be used to trigger webhooks and workflows, and the power and the risk that comes in with that. So another nice detail about Autotask Kanban boards, which we'll demonstrate, is how customizable they are. The out-of-the-box Kanban board settings work initially, but we're going to show you you really need to refine and customize those settings in order for Kanban to be effective for your organization. Otherwise, they can actually make it more difficult for you to see what's going on. So let's move on. And what I'm going to do here is we're actually going to go live with Autotask. And I'm going to walk you through making sure it's set up properly. Half of you will have it working right now. The other half are not going to be seeing the boards. And I'm going to show you why that is to make sure you have these enabled and working. So let me make sure I can share my screen properly. Okay, Beth, can you see my Autotask?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. All right, so this is just a normal Autotask. Notice I've already started working through a Kanban board setup for us. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go through a couple of settings in Autotask just so you can verify you have it set up properly if it's not showing for you now. Because in fact, it has rolled out to all of the regions as far as I'm aware. One screen people don't even realize exists is this screen, activations. This is where you can turn on and off different settings in Autotask to make them go away or appear. For example, if you do not use contact groups and you just don't want to confuse people, you would turn it off completely from here. Same thing for the walls. I think this is their social media-like attempt. Every company has tried this. Generally, they're not super effective. I always recommend turn it off. But this is where you turn these things on and off. You're going to want to make sure it's enabled here. If it's disabled, obviously you will not see it, nor will any of your technicians. Second, security class. Most common reason you cannot see a Kanban board is it is not enabled in your security class. I'm going to go through setting that up so you can see how it is. Now, one thing you have to be clear on is when you make this change and you enable it for security class, my experience is you will need to log out and log back in for you to see the settings. So I'm logged in this test tenant as a system administrator. And if I remember, even the system administrator account here, they don't automatically enable it when they roll it out. And so you still have to go enable it. So you're going to go under service desk. And you're going to ensure board permissions are enabled. Now notice there's two different settings here. This is not what you always want to enable. In fact, for a normal technician, you do not want to enable this. I'm going to go through later. I'm going to go through why later in the webinar, but I want to repeat. This should not be enabled for all of your staff without really good reason, because Kanban boards can bypass a lot of your process if you're not careful, right? So we're going to make sure this is enabled for the service manager, triage, and potentially your dispatcher. Finally, when you want to use Kanban boards, if you enable it for people, they can view them in their own personal dashboards. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have a shared dashboard. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to create a special dashboard. And then from this dashboard, we're going to add all of our entries and then share it to the people that need access to it. We're going to use a personal board for this example, but that is how you would do it. You would do it through a shared dashboard. Okay, so let's move through. And if you guys have questions on that, or if you want to enable it real quick during the webinar, we will have a Q&A at the end, and I can help you if you have any issues with that. So let's move forward. So in this section, we're going to move into the use cases. So we're going to introduce the concept of use cases and explain why they're so important when it comes to configuring your Autotask Kanban boards. A use case is going to be a specific example of how your team will use the Kanban board, and it will exclude some of your people. Each use case is targeted toward a role. Rolling out Kanbans to your entire company with one Kanban board is a very bad idea. It will not be effective, and it will confuse your staff. So what we're going to do is we're going to find use cases and important roles in your organization. And then you can expand on that in your own Autotask. And by all means, email me, and I'm happy to work through some use cases that are specific to your company. So in the next few slides, we're going to provide those examples. And then I'm going to dig into the gotchas of deploying these Kanban boards for each use case so you can see how you should really be working through the process. So our first use case is triage. Not relevant if you have a full-time triage, a part-time, or it's a shared role. Somebody is always triaging tickets in your organization. So what we're going to do now is we're going to walk through this process of configuring a Kanban board for the triage process. And in fact, Kanban shines when it comes to the triage process. So let's take a look real quick. This is the initial board, and I want to show you a gotcha that you're going to have to be ready for. It's also going to guide you toward correct thinking. Notice I have a normal dashboard widget here, and I'm going to click and open it. The first error I get is that this board has too much data. And this is an important concept to understand with Kanban. Kanban cannot run your entire service desk. It's not meant for it. You're not meant to look at graphs and pictures of things that have thousands of entries, right? And so you need to refine each use case for what it really should have. Otherwise, Kanban, whether it's Autotask or any other software, will not effectively manage those tickets. So the first thing you have to realize when you're working through Kanban boards is, what is the data I want to look at? Because again, it cannot be all the data. It won't support that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a widget here. And I'm going to walk you through why I've configured it this way. Because you always need to have a clear vision of what that role should and should not be seen. So I created a gauge-based widget here. And then any number above 1, or above 0 rather, is a red. And again, the thinking here is if this is triage, any number other than 0 means there's work to be done. And whether it's a Kanban board or any other type of widget, whether on this dashboard or another dashboard, there is a right and a wrong way to do it. And I'm strongly opinionated on this. Any number other than 0 is the wrong number on a widget or a gauge. The reason is we have no context for what this number means. Is this a good number or a bad number? If my MSP has 10 customers, this is a bad number. If my MSP has 10 million customers, this is a phenomenal number. Raw numbers provide 0 context. They are bad for KPIs. Zeros have total clarity. If you get to a 0 and it's green, that's good. Any number that is not a 0 is bad. You always want to do something called manage by 0 or to 0. All of your numbers, all of your KPIs should drive toward that. Even your revenue should go toward a projected revenue. And when it meets that projected revenue, the gauge becomes 0, right? So notice we're red and a non-0. I'm going to click this. And notice it brings up a very, very kind of tightly configured Kanban board. I'm going to show you the default that they want to use. I think this is the default. And so notice it's going to show you the status, and it's going to give you some estimated hours. You may also see something like this, which is all the statuses. This is completely useless. This is a bad configuration for a Kanban board. The reason is each role in your organization maps to specific statuses in help desk. That is how you define process and good workflow in your organization. Triage does not care if a ticket is waiting on a customer. Triage does not care if the ticket's even being worked or if it's been dispatched. That is not the role of triage. The role of triage is to look at new tickets, to code them, prioritize them, and push them to dispatch. So all we care about here are how many tickets do we have in the new status to be triaged, and how old are they so that we can work them in the order from oldest to newest. So this is an effective Kanban board. Notice it doesn't look like a typical Kanban board you're going to see in a commercial or an ad from Autotask or anybody else, where they have a bunch of different lanes and it's very pretty. Not helpful, right? Reduce data to only the data needed by the technician or the administrator. So in this situation, we can see that we have these tickets to be triaged. Now, we can move them into waiting dispatch, but generally in your triage, you would want to edit the ticket, properly code the account, contact, issue, sub-issue, queue, etc. And then when you're done, you would update the status or move it. So notice here we have a dilemma. You can move this over here and it will update the status. However, we have data loss when we do that. Keep that in mind. we did it. We did move it. We update the status, but what does that actually do for us, right? The account hasn't been updated. Maybe we need to update the priority. So always keep in mind, what is the transition state that's happening here, right? And so you may even want to remove this from their view and only show the new. And I'm going to show you how that's done. So you can get to this screen by going to Service Desk Boards, and they do have a shortcut, you'll notice here, which is the configuration. And notice here, you can say all values just in the data set, which will just show me new, or those values in addition to, for example, waiting dispatch. Maybe that's just a view we would just want to see, so we can see what tickets are actually in that status. That's how you edit what is seen here. And so you're going to want a configuration for triage only used by triage, because nobody else has this specific pattern of work. Okay, so let's move to the next use case, which is going to be dispatch. So dispatch is different from triage. Triage is an arrow. In triage, you touch a ticket one time, you should never see that ticket ever again. In dispatch, that is a cycle. The tickets come back to you because they're either need to be scheduled, an appointment needs to be booked, maybe the ticket is going idle, or the customer has replied to the ticket. In all those situations, they loop back to the dispatcher. Even if the technician is self-dispatching, that is a dispatch process. And so they're going to have a different view than triage would. In fact, they're going to have more lanes in their Kanban board. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at that so that you can visualize the flow of work and see at a glance which tickets are being worked on, which ones are waiting for a response, and which ones have been resolved. So we're going to go back here and notice I'm refining these widgets to show just the boards that I want. Now look at dispatch. These are common statuses that dispatch has to handle. Escalate, done yet. Often this means idle. You may have a workflow rule for this. A lot of people do. Let's say that a ticket sits in a status called waiting customer for 5 days or waiting vendor, waiting parts. And that workflow will kick it out of that waiting status after a predetermined number of days and kick it into an idle status so somebody can jump on it, right? And so done yet and to dispatch. I'm a dispatcher, so these are all under my domain. I'm going to look at to dispatch. See here. Now notice I'm looking at a very similar grid. What we really want to do here is we want to modify this because this does not help the dispatcher much at all, right? And so what we're going to try the first time is a dispatcher is going to be worried about two things: the resource assigned to the ticket and the status. And again, going in circles on this, critical that you understand Kanban boards have to be customized to the role. Generic Kanban boards are not effective and they will not help you. Right, so we're going to start customizing it for this particular role. And we're going to talk about the on deck shortly. It is useful in some situations. Generally, I would recommend turning it off, and I'll show you why. And so notice what we have now is the dispatcher sees all the ticket statuses available to them and all the resources. This is a bad Kanban board. The reason is the dispatcher does not care about new tickets, nor do they care about tickets that have already been scheduled for work. They've already done the job. Why do they need to look at the ticket? In fact, most of these statuses have no relevance to the dispatcher. Never overload your tech or your dispatcher or your triage with data they do not need. It makes them ineffective. So what we're going to do next is we're going to move over to a modified version, which again only includes things that the dispatcher may want to see. For example, they may want to check on waiting materials and waiting customer and see if there's a delay if you're not using the automated workflow rules, right? And so these tickets are to be dispatched. Now, again, simply moving a ticket to a new status results in data loss. If I go from here to here, this feels good. It's very fast. It's pretty, but it's pointless. In fact, it provides a negative value to your company. The reason is Why was it moved to waiting vendor? Nobody knows. So again, you don't want to enable the ability to move tickets between lanes for everybody because it's counterproductive. You have data loss when you do this. So instead, typically what you would want to do is you would want to go into the ticket and actually make the efforts needed to do to put it in the correct lane, right? So in this situation, we have this ticket open. We need to send it back to waiting vendor. There's different ways. If you're using Rocketship, you might just have a macro for that. And so let's say we want to send it to waiting vendor, parts on order, or whatever, right? And so we may want to send that off to the dispatcher in Rocketship, or we may want to make some other changes here. And then what will happen is whenever this board refreshes, this will make a change to where it is. So again, always refining Kanban boards to the minimum data necessary and being very aware of what happens if you allow the person to move between lanes, because using Kanban board for that process does result in data loss. And that may be okay in some situations, particularly with a service manager, but almost never is that okay with a dispatcher or with the service technician. Now, one thing I do want to bring up in this, and I'll go into more detail, is when you move tickets between lanes, it still triggers workflows. So, and webhooks as well. So if you're using software, Rocketship is an example, where you can automate escalations, dispatch, scheduling, appointment booking. When you move it into that next lane, and you know you have software that automates the process as tickets have changes, in that situation, the documentation is triggered from the workflow rule, but you cannot add data as a tech or a user directly when you simply move between lanes. Now let's look at the final case where Kanban boards make a lot of sense. So one thing I want to highlight here is we have skipped using Kanban boards for techs. Maybe you want to use a Kanban board for the tech. It can work, but there's a struggle there. So Kanban boards are for visualizing the status or the state of a ticket, whereas a technician needs to be queued work in the order based on the priority and the age of the ticket, and also on the availability of their time and their workload. Kanban boards can be used for this, but it can be difficult at times. So we're going to pass on that one because it's just not the best use case. Can be done, not the best use case. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at an example oversight. Again, we're focused on manage to zero here, not pretty graphs. So in this situation, we're going to use gauges. So looking at these two gauges, there's two common scenarios you want oversight as a service manager. Is a ticket just getting long in the tooth? Is it old or is it idle? So let's look at some old tickets. So I have a past webinar where we talk about KPIs. And at my MSP, we did use internal SLAs, but internal SLAs can be gimmicked. And so you also want to look at just the raw age of a ticket. And so this is where you would look and you would start refining what your service manager sees. So they only have to worry about those things. Here, we're using priority and primary resource, which makes sense. These tickets are getting old. As a service manager, I'm going to focus on the high priority items. Those I want to tackle right now. Then I want to shift to medium. Then I want to shift to low. So again, we're always focused on what's going to provide the most value for us. So let's talk briefly about Webflow, workflow, webhooks, and automation. So if you modify a ticket in Autotask, whether via Kanban or any other process, it will kick off associated workflows and webhooks. This is extremely powerful. So if we go back to here and we configure our workflow rules, for example, let's say that we have, we're looking at by status and primary resource. And actually, I think this one, let's do this one. So this one shows all of our statuses. Again, the key thing here is if you configure your workflow rules properly, you can automate some stuff and have it self-document. And so in your workflow rule, particularly if you email communication to the customer, always enable the feature where it adds the note to the ticket. And so, for example, let's say that you have a ticket that is waiting customer. And in that waiting customer, you need to send a reminder to them manually for whatever reason. Maybe it's high priority and you don't want it to auto close. If you configure the workflow, a hook in the workflow to trigger on a status called remind customer, you can from here move it to remind customer, trigger that workflow, and move to your next thing. So that is where you can use automation to really reduce the manual effort. Again, this is being done by an administrator or triage or dispatch, not really by the tech. The tech should really be inside the ticket doing the work. So let's talk about when to not use Kanban. We'll start off when to work it. When you want to see work to be assigned, great use case. Seeing work that needs to be scheduled, phenomenal use case. Seeing work that's already been done and you need a quality control, great use case. Seeing work that's been forgotten, has gone idle, phenomenal. Bad, actual work should not be done in the Kanban. It is not meant for that. Is it a visualization technique? It is not a work technique. Process documentation. So one thing that you'd be very careful with Kanban is how you use it to implement and visualize the process in your company. If you cannot write a flowchart that leads into the Kanban, be careful with Kanban because it just provides another tool that your team will use, and then you'll have less control over your tickets. Finally, why an update occur? Again, if you're just moving tickets between statuses and priorities and technicians, and you don't document why, that is very confusing. Most people are not comfortable with their technicians just going and editing tickets and changing the status randomly, or the issue, sub-issue, or the priority. You want them to document that. So why would we want them doing that using a Kanban board? It's the same outcome. It's just a different way to visualize the work. So those are not good situations for it. All right, so quick input real quick, and we're about to move into the Q&A. So Autotask Kanban, great for visualizing the tickets and great for manually assigning tickets, particularly out of triage and dispatch. With our tool, we provide a ton of automation on top of Autotask and Kanban boards. That includes automatic assignment based on skills and workload. You can escalate tickets every direction. You provide the tickets in the order they should be worked. You block them out. You can book appointments. So a heads up, you can hook tools into this that really bring it to the next level. All right, Beth, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Now reach the end of our presentation on how to use Autotask like a pro. We have discussed the basics of Kanban and the benefits of using it in the help desk. Shown you how to set up and configure your Autotask Kanban board and provided some examples of how to use it in different scenarios. Before we conclude, we would like to invite you to ask any questions you may have about Kanban or the Autotask platform. We'll be happy to answer your questions and provide additional information as needed. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to your questions. One piece of housekeeping. In a few days, we will be emailing out the presentation to everybody that attended, and we'll be uploading the video as smaller sections to YouTube so you can watch specific sections as you'd like.
All right, Beth, I see some questions.
Yes. Question regarding workflows. Are the workflows able to sniff out who it is that makes a change? I.e., if a workflow is configured to apply a change to a ticket based on a specific user, the manager is the one that dragged a tile from one location to another.
Okay, so that's a good question. No, workflows rules do not work like that. You can use work groups in your workflow rules. If I remember, you can use work groups. But otherwise, you're going to trigger off of the type of user, but not a specific user. Somebody correct me, but you can trigger off of who owns the ticket, for example, but not the actual initiator. If that's changed, let me know. Again, that's why it's important. There's zero reason to give everybody the ability to move tickets between lanes and Kanban boards. It's a bad idea, but it does make sense for special roles like triage, dispatch, and managers.
Hey, Dustin, another question. Can Kanban boards be used with projects or project tasks?
Pretty sure that is not available currently. I think that's from Brian. Brian, good question. I had hoped the same thing. So, for example, in Rocket Ship, we do a lot of the automation in tasks the same way we do tickets. One thing that we really look forward to with Kanban and Autotask is that we didn't have to implement that fully. And it would be really nice if they did implement that for tasks. I'm sure it's on the drawing board, but I'm not sure what the status is of that.
Okay, I have a question from John. When I tried to move tickets between each lane in the board, it wouldn't move.
Okay, 100% is because if you go into the security class, you do not have that right enabled. And so I had demonstrated at the beginning of the webinar, you need to go modify the security class for whatever user that is in that.
A question from Sophie. Why can't I just let my staff work from the Kanban board and let them manage everything from there?
So you can, in theory, for sure. So the issue there is, again, it's always information overload. So whenever I've set up an MSP for the technician, let's talk about how you would do it outside Rocket Ship. Again, get rid of all the fancy graphs. You just need to give them a gauge, right? The gauges need to say, you've got 4 tickets ready to be worked in high priority. Now you've got 7 tickets in medium priority. You've got 2 in low priority. Work them in that order, right? That's all that matters for technicians. They work tickets in the correct order. Their job is not to manage everything. The Kanbans are great for visualizing. By all means, give them access to a Kanban board if you want, so they can visualize it. I would not allow them to move tickets between the lanes inside of a Kanban board. But again, it can be too much information. One issue I do have with a lot of MSPs that I've worked with is, why do we overload people with information just because the graphs are pretty? Just give them the minimum needed so you get the maximum from them. They're going to appreciate it because they know exactly what they need to do every day to be successful. Now, inside Rocket Ship, we approach it differently. For every ticket, you just define the block of time needed to accomplish that ticket. It will always dynamically order the work for each ticket on the Rocket Ship work board so that they are always working the right ticket at the right time. And then Kanban can integrate with that in terms of the routing of the tickets and making sure that you have a good visualization of the process and the status of each thing. Beth?
Okay, question from Hink. Can we use Kanban boards for project management?
Okay, so no. Similar to Brian's question, as far as I'm aware, they do not have it supporting tasks. If I'm wrong, by all means, let me know. But that is not currently available. I do know, I think there's a couple of other tools out there that provide Kanban for Autotask, and I think they support projects, but I'm not sure.
A question from Ava. I hear about Scrum sometimes when I read about Kanban difference. Exactly.
Yeah, good question, actually. So Kanban comes out of this whole agile mindset. The difference between Kanban and Scrum is actually more rigid. It's got a very specific way it wants you to do things. It has a very specific cadence of meetings and how you talk about things. It's kind of like if anybody here does gazelles, or you do traction for your corporate governance, where it's very specific how you do. Elizabeth is not a bot. She's actually from an MSP. She is a full-time trainer, and we always laugh because she is the calmest, most just the perfect way of talking. That versus me, I tend to rush and talk very quickly. Good question though, but it's different. It's not nearly as rigid. Kanban is all about visualization, whereas Scrum is like a whole operating system for managing tickets and tasks.
Okay, I have a question from Kelsey. We already use another product that integrates Autotask that gives us Kanban boards. Do I still need to use that or this?
And so, I mean, I'm kind of the mind that I think, we're a SaaS platform, right? We provide a lot of features that are not available in any PSA, right? Just the automated escalations and ticket routing and blocking of time, and that's all great. But if there's a PSA that we integrate with that has those features, then that's just not the market for us, right? It doesn't make sense. So I think there are a couple of companies that are probably going to be slowly exiting Autotask, or they're going to have to up their game and provide features that are above and beyond. Because the Kanban implementation in Autotask, the only real negative of it is it doesn't seem to tackle projects and tasks. And I suspect they're going to come out with that. But for tickets, I mean, it's a Kanban board. There's only so much you need to do from a Kanban board. So it seems to work well for me.
Okay, a question from Cody. If we can move tickets on this to make webhooks and things like that trigger, does that mean that third-party programs can move items around on the Kanban board too?
Absolutely. So the Kanban board is just a visualization. That's a hard word for me. And so it's similar just to how the typical grid view or a widget view in Autotask works. And it's just showing you what the data is. So for example, if somebody escalates a ticket in Rocket Ship up to the next tier, then whenever that Kanban board refreshes, you're going to magically see that ticket move to a new slot or a new resource or a new status. So the answer is yes.
Okay, and finally from Tanya, why do we need a dispatcher if we have Kanban? I guess I'm not understanding the point.
Well, that's a good question. So a dispatcher has a specific role, right? So the Kanban board, again, is just about visualizing it. Now, there are some roles that can be, if you already have that person, they can be kind of optimized. They can do more. Again, just bring up Rocket Ship. So with Rocket Ship, you can say, look, all these tickets of this issue or whatever, this priority go to these tiers, then it goes to that tiers, and this is that situation. And so in that situation, the dispatcher moves more to a service coordinator position and not just looking at calendars. But Kanban boards they can't really replace a dispatcher. They just give the dispatcher more information in a cleaner way so that they can do their job. So I do not think Kanban boards replace a dispatcher. In fact, I think we're at time here. So I want to thank everybody for attending. Great questions. And as Beth mentioned, we have some follow-up. We're going to send you guys the presentation over the next several days. Give us a little bit of time because we have to clean up the recording. And then I hope to hear from you. If you have any questions about Kanban boards or Autotask in general, we have a very rich blog where I'm constantly blogging and pushing that out to Reddit and other places that in response to questions there. Feel free to look at that or just shoot me an email and I'm happy to answer anything free of charge. All right, thanks everybody.